I never expected a trip for grilled cheese to change my life. When my wife said, "Let's check out the SHAID," I reluctantly agreed. Meeting Lenny was magical, but now I face an unbearable goodbye. He's just too good to be sick. Will my heart ever heal from this loss? May 11th, 2024, my wife mentioned that she wanted to go into town to get some grilled cheese sandwiches from a local restaurant. I replied, "That is a great idea, I love their grilled cheese." So we got into our Jeep and drove out. Casually, my wife said, "Hey, let's go to the SHAID, we haven't been there in a while." The SHAID is a pet rescue shelter. This was a typical occurrence. It felt like she was trying to convince me to get another pet every other day. I would respond with things like, "No, if the cats become self-aware, we will be outnumbered. And if we are getting another pet, it has to be something like a tiger or a panther." I just did not want to acquire a cat for the sake of having a cat. I desired a connection that I was convinced I would never find. On this day, for reasons I do not understand, I decided to make the right turn. Before I knew it, we were parked in the SHAID parking lot. "Okay, let's make this quick," I said with a sigh, already suspecting this was going to be a waste of time. I kept thinking about how I was getting further and further away from that delicious sandwich. We walked in and were immediately greeted by the staff. We exchanged pleasantries, then were asked what brought us in. "Just looking," I replied with a smirk on my face. I was playing on memories I had from previous jobs where customers would say that in a knee-jerk reaction when approached. "I want to see the kitties," my wife said excitedly. I knew she had been wanting to add a third cat since we got together 6 years ago, so I went along and browsed. Most of the cats were either sleeping or just uninterested. I did not really blame them, in fact, I was encouraging it. "That's right," I thought, "just stay where you are and we will be gone before you know it." We entered a second room, and I turned to my left and saw a pair of eyes looking directly at me. This creature, as dark as night, locked eyes with me and slowly made its way to the front of the cage. Like a considerate individual, I invited it to smell my hand. I thought it was a polite gesture. The creature began to meow, then nuzzle, then purr at my hand. At that moment, just like in the movies, I fell hopelessly in love. We made a genuine connection. The next 2 hours were nearly a blur. All I can recall is leaving the SHAID, going home to retrieve a cat carrier my wife already had, a small blanket, and then taking her vehicle to bring him home. We found out his name was Harvey, but to us he seemed more like a Lenny. We brought him home. We were incredibly unprepared, so my wife suggested I stay in the bedroom with him while she went out to gather some extra supplies. During that time, we hung out. Although we had just met, we were infatuated with each other. I told him how old I was, that I liked to play music, and throughout the conversation he meowed right on cue, keeping the dialogue flowing. I discovered through the paperwork that he was 10 years old and had coughing fits. We chatted about feeling old and other old man topics. I had just celebrated a birthday nearly 2 weeks earlier. Days later, he faced some resistance from our other two cats, Simi, the lovable, happy-go-lucky female cat, and Ebony, the epitome of darkness, royally spiteful and the queen of the household. Lenny was curious and into everything he could see. He was definitely testing boundaries, looking for his place in the hierarchy. A few weeks passed and we resembled a comedy duo. He would jump up and lay on my stomach while I gamed. He would lay on top of my head in bed, covering my forehead with his tail and belly. I called him Lenny Longfellow because he was exceptionally long. There were times I would lay in bed doom-scrolling on Facebook or Reddit and he would purposefully put his tail over my eyes. I caught on, it was time to sleep. He would not leave my side at all. For months, he would always be at most a leg's length away from me. There were times when, if I was not petting him behind the ears in a certain way or stroking the top of his head to his back, he would slowly yet firmly dig his claws into me. That was my warning, love me the way we know. Once we were playing and he clawed me very well on my finger. My wife asked if I was okay and all I did was smile and say, "Of course I am, I hope it scars, then I'll always have a reminder of him." He was incredibly intelligent too. We kept joking that he was a retired or maybe active spy. We would let him outside onto our enclosed deck and he would casually jump over the railings to sniff the flowers. Well, I did not appreciate that, so we made the railings taller. It did not matter, he knew how to jump over them. He was remarkably skilled at finding a weakness in anything, then striking at the first opportunity. As winter approached, he became more and more of a mama's boy. I do not know if he was trying to make me jealous or not, but it worked. He spent more time with my wife. I think she was bribing him with more food, and he was not snuggling with me as much. I thought perhaps I was being an overbearing dad, so I let the boy come to me when he felt inclined. Every once in a while, when I placed my hand next to him while he laid down, he would put his paw over my hand and gaze at me with those big, beautiful eyes. It was as if he was saying, "It is okay, Dad, I still love you." Fast forward to March of 2025. The first weekend of March arrived and the boy did not seem well. He felt quite warm to the touch and appeared very lethargic. When Monday came and he had not improved, it was time to see the veterinarian. After collecting blood samples, we discovered he had cat flu. That explained the high temperature. She prescribed medication for him and demonstrated how to administer it. I wish that was where the conversation ended. After a closer examination, the veterinarian reviewed additional details from his paperwork. He was dangerously low on white blood cells, and his red blood cells were also insufficient. She showed us various metrics of where a healthy cat should be, then indicated where Lenny was. It was far from satisfactory. His body was fighting something and was losing. She suspected it could be an infection, so she gave us steroids for him to take in addition to the other medication. She emphasized the importance of remaining hopeful, noting that there were many possible explanations, but she wanted to rule out the easy issues first. On the first night, we laid him out on the counter, and my wife administered the medication and steroids into his mouth while I gently held him down. Initially, there was some struggle, after all. Who does not resist when someone is physically holding them down? But after a few nights, he took it all in stride. He relaxed and accepted what his body needed. I noticed he was not sleeping in the bed with us as often anymore. That was strange. The blood work appointments occurred every couple of days, showing some improvement. Then a week later, he showed even more improvement. Eventually, we reached a point where we acknowledged he was not out of the woods, but he was appearing to be more like himself. Everyone at the veterinary clinic adored Lenny. There was never any thought of, yeah, you have to say that. He was so handsome, well-natured, and calm. He just had a naturally lovable demeanor. His blood work continued to show positive signs, so his next appointment was scheduled for a week and a half later. April 4th, 2025. My wife was working late hours at the office and finally returned home around 8:30 p.m. "Hey babe, how was the rest of your day?" I asked while gaming. I received a call from the veterinarian. His blood work deteriorated. He is worse now than he was when we brought him in. My heart sank. I dropped the controller and stood up. "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" We both began to cry. All we could do was embrace each other. The medications we administered were merely patching him up, holding him together. We had approached this situation believing he was battling an infection, while the cold, dark possibility of cancer may have been looming over us the entire time. We thought it was unlikely. We were simply following what the blood work suggested. Despite this, he looked and acted so normal. I had never encountered this type of situation before, and everyone who knows me understands how I feel about loss. It simply did not make sense to me that his blood work was so poor while he was acting normally. We speculated that he might have felt anxious and depressed when we left for work, which may or may not have affected his health. We made a plan. I would work from home while my wife went to the office. New team members had joined our company. We both worked for the same organization, so it made sense. We scheduled another appointment, hoping that by the time it arrived, his stats would improve. During that week, he had been laying at most an arm's length away from me. He was perched on my makeshift work desk, constantly supervising and helping by laying on my keyboard and mouse. He was a bit slower than usual, but he was eating like a maniac. I thought, this has to have a positive effect on him. April 9th, 2025. The veterinarian collected his blood, and within 15 minutes she confirmed there had been a slight boost. He was now hovering at 2 white cells per microliter, while a normal cat should sport at least 250 white cells per microliter. His gums were becoming paler too. My boy was fading. We began to have a difficult conversation with the veterinarian. She assured us that she was with us 100% of the way, regardless of our decision. She even mentioned consulting a blood specialist to see if anything else could be done. She indicated there was another test we could perform to determine if he qualified for special treatment. The blood work would be sent to a different province, with results anticipated by Monday or Tuesday. Great, I thought. We had a new plan, and there was some hope. April 10th, 2025, Lenny woke up from laying on the floor and we fed him and administered his medication. He continued to assist me with my work, but throughout the morning he appeared a bit sluggish. By noon I fed him and he devoured the food. Okay, good, he was still hungry. He wandered around, used the litter box, and was on the prowl. Hours passed, and while I was working I glanced at the time. I paused for a moment and tried to remember the last time Lenny had been up on the table in front of me. I had come up with the clever idea of placing a non-plugged keyboard on the table so he could lay there and help, while I used my wireless keyboard on my lap. I thought it was pretty smart. I went into the bedroom to find him laying on a hoodie on the floor. I froze, my eyes locked on him. He was facing away from me. I gently called his name and he barely opened his eyes in response. He let out a faint meow. Oh no. I approached and started petting him, assuring him that he was not alone. I was crying because I did not want him to be in this situation at all. It simply was not fair. He was too good. He was just too good to be unwell. I allowed him to rest for another hour, then opened some cat food to entice him to get up. He showed no interest. Damn, oh no, no, no. He was laying there, looking comfortable but not himself. He would have gobbled up that plateful of food just like the Black Panther I knew he was. My wife returned home around 8:30 p.m. after another long shift at the office and saw him. She knelt down to see him more closely and began to cry. I stood up and explained what I had observed throughout the day and that I had not anticipated his decline would be this rapid. She began to cry even harder. We understood the situation. And what was worse was that he now knew he was sick, which was precisely what she had hoped to avoid. We both thought he would hold on long enough to receive the results back. However, my poor boy was quietly battling this unseen terror like a true gentleman. Weakly, he placed his paw over each of our hands, attempting to comfort us. Things were not looking good, folks. We were utterly devastated and heartbroken. We knew what we had to do the following day. I would have to say goodbye to my best friend who had loved me unconditionally since the moment we locked eyes. I just wished he understood how sorry we were. I was the hopeful one, wishing he would begin to improve his stats. I felt so guilty, feeling as though I was selfish for letting this go on as it did. I never imagined he would deteriorate this quickly. Now my wife was lying next to him, covered with a blanket by the side door. He would not get up and he would not let her get up. He was being the perfect gentleman, comforting us while we desperately wanted to comfort him. I am so glad I made that turn to the SHAID that day. That was the greatest sandwich I never had. This might just be the longest and shortest night of my life. Story 2. My best friend's relationship of 2.5 months is raising red flags. You've got nothing to lose, Alice said, but Sophie felt belittled. After facing guilt-tripping and blame-shifting, is it time to salvage the relationship or should my friend just walk away? Hello everyone. I am usually more of a lurker on this subreddit, also known as I Watch the Click in Oz's Vault on YouTube, so please bear with me regarding any missteps I might make concerning the subreddit's customs. Furthermore, this post is not about my perpetually single situation, but rather about my best friend's relationship, who also chose the title for this post. She does not have Reddit or is very familiar with it, so she asked me to post here for some external perspective. Everything shared here has been written collaboratively with her and has been approved by her prior to posting. Now let's address the issue. My best friend, who is 24 years old, let's call her Sophie, is 26 years old. She has been in a relationship with Alice, who is 24, for approximately 2.5 months after having known each other for roughly 8 months beforehand. Approaching the 3-month mark, which I have heard is around the time the initial phase subsides. Feel free to correct me, the first issues in their relationship have begun to surface. Another piece of information that will undoubtedly impact the situation, and thus I would like to include at the outset, is that Sophie has been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, depression, childhood post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety, or as she humorously puts it, this girl has mental issues, laughing, while Alice has been diagnosed with dependent personality disorder. For some background, Sophie is currently considering applying for a scholarship to further her education in her field and advance her career. However, she feels quite anxious about various aspects of this process. 1. It is a considerable amount of effort to actually apply for the scholarship. 2. Receiving the scholarship does not guarantee acceptance at the university she wishes to attend. And 3. She is fearful that she will not be able to complete the program and will have to drop out due to subject-specific, but primarily mental challenges it may present, which would consequently mean she would lose the scholarship and have to repay all the financial assistance. To summarize, she is concerned about not being accepted, and if she is accepted, about not being able to finish the program. Particularly concerning the potential loss of the scholarship and having to drop out, she worries that she would lose her current, fairly well-paying job for no reason. She discussed some of her concerns with Alice, and her reaction served as a trigger for Sophie to realize that some issues were bothering her. This led her to seek my opinion to determine whether she was overreacting. I too am diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, but I possess greater objective analytical skills than she does. When Sophie informed Alice about her contemplation of applying and her concerns, Alice's response was simply, "Just try it, you have nothing to lose." While this is not necessarily a bad perspective concerning the scholarship application, considering that Sophie genuinely has something to lose if she begins attending university and fails, she understandably found this reaction unhelpful, feeling that her fears were not being taken seriously and were instead being dismissed. After our discussion, Sophie also realized that Alice often makes statements like everything will be fine, even in scenarios where upon objective inspection, a perspective Sophie and I typically share due to our autism, such assertions are untrue. This just go with it and everything will work out mentality can in our view be quite detrimental, especially when the odds are already not in one's favor, leading us to consider it a form of close to toxic positivity. At this point, this really does not appear to be a significant issue, and you would likely advise her to have a conversation with Alice to express how her reaction made her feel. However, the problem is that she has already done this before reaching out to me, and this is where matters began to take a turn for the worse. When Sophie first remarked, "But I don't believe everything will genuinely be fine as you claim," Alice simply responded, "Well, I think it is going to be fine." Later, when Sophie brought up her concern regarding Alice's reaction and acknowledged that she understood Alice intended to help and comfort her, she stated that this approach just does not work for her, making her feel belittled and indicating that she needed a different kind of support. Alice became defensive, claiming she only meant well and that Sophie made her feel bad for expressing her feelings, thus completely shifting the focus onto herself. In my perspective, she effectively diverted attention from the matter at hand, which is Sophie attempting to resolve the issue and clarify aspects for future scenarios. This guilt-tripped Sophie and portrayed herself as the victim while casting Sophie into the role of the antagonist, even though in this case the roles should be reversed. I don't know, but this tendency to deflect blame rather than engage in meaningful conversation and take steps to improve oneself for the sake of a partner's well-being seems like a red flag to me, and Sophie concurs that it does begin to enter red flag territory. If I learned that I had inadvertently hurt my partner, I would strive to find ways to avoid that in the future. Moreover, this is not the first time something like this has occurred, though previously it was less noticeable as it manifested on a smaller scale. We just perceive the risk of this evolving into a more significant issue should the relationship continue, where every time Sophie raises any concern, it gets twisted around to portray her as the wrongdoer. Sophie believes that Alice's difficulty in handling criticism is not limited to their relationship, noting she even struggles to accept feedback from her professors at university, taking any form of critique personally and feeling as though she is being attacked. A few days following their conversation, Alice suggested that they both apologize to one another for their hurt feelings, hug at their next date, and then move on, an approach both Sophie and I found problematic since we do not see any reason for Sophie to apologize. Alice claims that Sophie hurt her feelings with her negativity, which we both perceive as simply a realistic and objective view of the scholarship university matter, and by stating that Alice's prior remarks did not assist her. Being informed of this apparently made Alice so upset that she struggled to sleep properly. Sophie and I think that the purpose of telling her this was solely to induce guilt. The suggestion to apologize, embrace, and move forward is perfectly reasonable in situations where both parties have something to apologize for, but we do not believe this applies here again, in our view. While discussing these matters, Sophie mentioned several other issues she has perceived as problematic. For instance, Alice forgot that Sophie was attending university for a free lecture to evaluate the experience despite Sophie having discussed it at length recently. Certainly, one may forget the specific date, but remembering that she is engaged in it generally should be expected. However, when Sophie sent a photo of the lecture hall, Alice's response was not, "Oh, that is today already," or something similar, but rather, "What is that?" It was as if she had not only forgotten the date, but also that Sophie was attending the lecture at all. Another concern is that Alice often engages in love bombing whenever she feels guilty about something she has said or done instead of addressing the issue. For example, Sophie once requested that Alice refrain from smoking when she is nearby or in the hallway of her apartment building, which I have since learned is likely illegal, so perhaps she can mention that next time. But Alice became offended and subsequently kept apologizing and saying, "I love you," rather than acknowledging and respecting Sophie's request and altering her behavior. At one point, Alice became upset when she mentioned a future scenario with "once we marry" in it, and Sophie responded, "We don't even know if we will ever get married," which is a perfectly reasonable statement if you ask me. Discussing the prospect of marriage or getting upset when someone does not focus on marriage just 2.5 months into dating seems rather unreasonable, in my opinion. Sophie is starting to question this relationship and feels somewhat overwhelmed by the entire situation. She is uncertain whether she should break up or not. Whenever she even hints at the possibility of parting ways, Alice becomes extremely disheartened and tends to guilt-trip her, causing Sophie to withdraw from the conversation. We feel that Alice's diagnosed personality disorder complicates the situation, which is why Sophie chose to seek insights from Reddit in the hopes of gaining new perspectives or different viewpoints. Generally, we believe that a disability or disorder can certainly explain an individual's behavior, but it cannot serve as an excuse. It is simply difficult to discern which behaviors stem from her dependent personality disorder and which may be attributed to character flaws that are not necessarily linked to her condition, and thus cannot be justified or excused by it. Notably, Alice is receiving therapy for her disorder, which is a positive indication that she is not in denial regarding her condition and acknowledges the need for professional assistance to address it. As this post has become quite lengthy, here is a list of insights she hopes to gain from this post. 1. What is your opinion? Do we truly view this as the problem it is, or are we exaggerating the situation? 2. Are we correct in perceiving Alice's behavior as shifting blame to elude accountability and the need to change her behavior? 3 suggestions or perspectives we may have overlooked or misinterpreted. 4. Advice on how to proceed with the relationship. Should she seek ways to salvage this relationship, and if so, how might she do that, or is it preferable for her to break up, given the numerous issues and potential red flags surfacing just 2.5 months in? P.S. Knowing how Reddit can be, I also inform Sophie when I think she is mistaken about something, and when we experience difficulties in our friendship, we communicate openly and work towards finding positive resolutions. Therefore, for any of you who may interpret our friendship as problematic due to how I have expressed our thoughts, that is not the case. I did not implant any of these ideas into her mind. This is merely a compilation of our chaotic texts, thoughts, and opinions gathered coherently over the 4 hours it took to put this together. Some of the points we share were introduced by her, and I agreed with them. Others were my observations, which she acknowledged but struggled to express until now. TLDR, my best friend, who does not have Reddit or knows how to use it, asked me to post this to gather various perspectives and ideas on how she should proceed with her new relationship since some significant issues, which may potentially serve as red flags, have emerged. Story 3. I buried my feelings for my coworker, but as her affair unfolded, I snapped and told her to fuck off, leading to a primal anger I never felt before. Now that a decade has passed, I'm realizing I never truly processed it. Am I still haunted by it? Over a decade ago, I began working 12-hour shifts with a girl who was 2 years older than I. We became friends and got along very well, and I became somewhat acquainted with her boyfriend. After a year of knowing her, I realized I had developed feelings for her. I panicked internally and began to behave differently around her, which she noticed, but I dismissed her concerns. I had no intention of pursuing anything because she was in a relationship. Our friendship has changed at this point, but we remain friends and continue to work together on these shifts, 3-person shifts. A few months later, a new guy joined our team, who was almost 10 years younger than she was. He was 18 when he started working with us. He was very cool and friendly, and we would hang out outside of work along with other coworkers. Eventually, it became apparent that she and he had grown very close, and I suspected she was having an affair with the new guy. I did not directly confront them about it. Instead, I started subtly flirting with her to pressure them into confessing, which they did 2 to 3 weeks after I began. From that moment on, the tension among the three of us, which had been created by my tactic, disappeared, and we continued to work together on those shifts, spending a lot of time together. Additionally, we would go out for drinks somewhat regularly outside of work. I do not remember the exact timeline, but their affair lasted approximately 14 months in total, and I was aware of it for most of that time. Now back to my experience with the girl. For these 18 to 19 months, I worked with her while knowing I had feelings for her, and suppressing those feelings took its toll. In the beginning, I felt some nervous energy around her, and she was always quick to call it out. What ultimately happened was her repeatedly instructing me not to feel this way, and I would try because if I did not, she would ignore me for the rest of the day. Thus, I endeavored to bury my feelings and ignore them. Spoiler alert, that is not a good idea. As I mentioned, we went out drinking a lot and usually it went fine, but sometimes we would end up arguing, and at this point, I honestly do not remember what we argued about. On one occasion, close to the end of their affair, I snapped over some trivial matter which was inconsequential on its own, but it was the final straw. I told her to go away because I had had enough of her, and as soon as I said it, all the feelings I had buried came rushing out at once. Only now, they were negative. By this time, she had already accepted another job elsewhere, but we still had a few weeks left to work together. Back at work, I continued to feel extreme anger towards her, and when she brought it up and pointed out the triviality of what had triggered my anger, I agreed with her and explained that I knew I was not angry about that specific incident. I understood that my anger was irrational, but I still felt it, and I could not suppress it. When I say I snapped, I truly mean I snapped. This was not like any anger I had ever experienced before, nor like any anger I have felt since then, despite having actual occasions to be very angry both before and after that moment. As a side note, an example of my past anger would be when I was inadvertently drugged by acquaintances who were attempting to drug my female friend. We had left her beer unattended at a small house party to go smoke, and when we returned, she gave it to me since we decided to take a taxi home. Fortunately, it did not fully take effect until after the taxi ride, so I was home by that point, but it left me unable to move, lying sideways on my bed with no control over my limbs, and it became increasingly difficult to breathe before I eventually passed out. The experience was harrowing enough. I could not imagine what it would have been like for my friend if I had not gotten that taxi home, as she would have been left alone with those friends of ours. An example of anger experienced after that incident occurred when I confronted a faculty member who was lying about a student sexually harassing his wife, only because that student had criticized students who were genuinely harassing girls, all because those students brought in significant revenue. Thankfully, the individual was a complete fool, as it could be proven that the student was in a different part of the country when the alleged incident was supposed to have happened, and the video evidence he provided, which showed someone who looked almost identical to the student in the area during that time, was confirmed to have been the guy's guest, meaning he was fully aware it was not the student. These were two instances when feeling angry was entirely justified, and I was indeed very angry on both occasions. However, it paled in comparison to the irrational anger I felt towards this girl. It was the most primal energy I had ever encountered, and it terrified me. I felt I was losing control. The rational part of my mind understood that the anger and hatred I felt were disproportionate. Yes, those had been strange 2 years, but I felt a constant urge to hurt her and nothing could justify that. I felt like I was on the verge of losing control, and so I began to distance myself from her in the last few weeks before she changed jobs. I was afraid of myself, so I thought it would be logical to make her afraid of me to ensure she would stay away after she left. I feared I was losing my mind, and that there would come a time in the future when the rational part of me which restrained the desire to hurt her would be gone, so I wanted her to distrust me. In the end, her last day came and went, and as I stopped being around her, my anger began to dissipate and I felt more in control of myself. A few weeks later, I sent her a text apologizing for how things ended, and she replied. She visited my workplace a few months later to chat with me, but apart from that, I have not seen her since, although we have had a few text conversations, none of which has occurred in the past 3 to 4 years. I have also refrained from pursuing a serious relationship since that time because I do not trust myself after this experience. What if I entered a serious relationship and felt these emotions again? No, thank you. During the same period, her affair began to crumble. After over a year of the relationship, the now 19-year-old guy grew tired of concealing their partnership. At this point, you may be wondering about her boyfriend throughout this situation. How had she managed to keep her affair under wraps? Well, he certainly had his suspicions, but she had made him suspicious of her having an affair with me instead of the young man, which meant that his inquiries were directed towards me, not the person she was actually seeing. This allowed her to not lie to him. Although she was lying to him, it probably seemed easier to lie indirectly. I am unsure how my friendship with her appeared from the outside, but the guy she was involved with did not seem to believe me when I insisted that she and I had never been intimate. He confronted us once but did not seem to trust our claims. This entire situation was chaotic, and I am sure we were a mess as well. Ultimately, she confessed to her boyfriend about who she had truly been seeing, or so she told me, along with the fact that he believed the affair was with me rather than the young man. To my knowledge, she and her boyfriend are still together, almost a decade later. Why am I only now releasing this from my mind after it happened 9 to 11 years ago? Well, a few months ago, I quit my job because I felt I needed at least a few months of a break, and I could afford it. I have not utilized the break wisely, in the sense that I still need to exercise more, I should quit smoking, etc. But it has still been nice and has primarily served as a good reset for my mental health, removing me from all the work-related stress I had been enduring over the past few years, in a completely different field than when I worked with the girl. That is, until I was reminded that I never processed the anger I described. I was reminded in the most peculiar way. I had spent significant time during my break in the evenings playing relaxing video games, with Twitch streaming in the background. Suddenly, the streamer I regularly watched began to remind me of this girl, and more precisely, how her demands that I conceal my feelings ultimately led to the breaking point I previously mentioned. This occurred because a friendship the streamer had appeared to start deteriorating because the guy liked her but she had a boyfriend. I overheard them arguing, and it ignited all my anger anew in an instant. Only this time, for some reason, it was directed at this streamer who had done absolutely nothing to me. She was merely navigating a personal issue in a public space. I did not initially understand why it made me so angry, even if I noticed some parallels to the situation I described. I simply wondered why I was feeling so paralyzed by witnessing their argument and the collapse of their friendship. After this transpired, I quickly stopped watching that streamer, but then I became irritated seeing her in my follow list when watching someone else, so I unfollowed her. Then I grew annoyed seeing her in the recommended sidebar, beneath the live channels you follow if you are familiar with the Twitch layout, so earlier tonight I blocked her to ensure she does not appear there while she is live. As I began to reflect on why the argument had provoked such anger in me, I realized, or perhaps just admitted to myself, that it was probably because I had never truly worked through my anger toward the girl I had worked with a decade ago. Therefore, I decided to write this post. It may not truly help, but at least I am getting it off my chest for now, and I can start working towards finding a competent psychiatrist.